Good morning. Today is Tuesday, January 16th, 2024. It is 10 a.m. and this is the meeting in Senate Natural Resources and Energy. We're going to be doing some bill introductions this morning, and we're starting with S218, an act related to the staffing of Dam Safety Division. The bill is being offered by Senator Westman, with whom I spoke just a few minutes ago. He is not going to come in to do his side of the bill introduction, but we are going to walk through with legislative counsel. Mr. O'Grady is here to do that for us. So, Mr. O'Grady, good morning. Thanks for coming. You can take us through please.
I did not bring my iPad to post it on the screen because it's a one-page bill.
Yes.
And it is effectively just an appropriation. As I think you heard over the past weeks, last month, the Dam Safety Division is in need of, or people believe it is in need of, employees. Currently, they have 3 full-time employees, 2 are engineers or technicians, 1 is administrative, and then they have 2 limited service positions, for I believe are also skilled professionals. The bill S218, the intent is to make those 2 limited service positions permanent, and then to add a 3rd permanent position. So there would be 5 professionals at the division and 1 administrative person for a total of 6 employees in the Dam Safety Division. Now, you can't just say a limited service position becomes a full-time position. You have to create the full-time position and then fund it at a full-time position value. So that is effectively what S218 does. You'll see, in addition to other funds appropriated to A&R fiscal year 25, $350,000 is appropriated to the agency for the purpose of funding 3 permanent full-time classified positions in the Dam Safety Division.
Okay, not here. So I'm guessing he is, well, we'll find out, but sort of a going rate for staff at different levels. It seems like I often budgets end up using 150, but
Yeah, I've been using 125, and still that probably is low for a professional engineer when we take into account their salary, plus benefits, plus healthcare.
I forget the percentage, but it's the overhead, whatever, I don't want to call it overhead. Beyond salary, you get something like 30 something with that, like chunk, right? And I think
The other thing in the bill text, you may want to explicitly create the positions, because in the big bill starts out with no other positions are authorized unless specifically authorized in this bill, something like that. So if this is going to move forward, I expect it'll wind up in the big bill. And I expect you'll have to actually create the positions to avoid that conflict. That section of the.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, I don't know if we're gonna end up with belts and suspenders, like we put this in the fine tuning bill, and then it just gets handled in the budget directly. Or what the path here is. And then, I don't know if Senator Weston's talked to you yet, but I gave him contact information for Ben Green, and he wanted to do a little more research before. I think I'm trying to better understand the need and quantify it and see if this was enough resource to make the progress we want to make on the A&R managed dams that are significant or high risk, that are also in less than good condition. What's the priority list? How long? Great. Great question. Right. So, and Senator Watson.
Yeah, thanks. I just feel like I have known this, but I just wanted to remind, what is the definition of like limited service?
They're only funded for a certain amount of time, like 2 to 3 years. And so they're not authorized as full-time permanent.
Well, thank you.
And in my understanding, the rules. Were more is that you can end up with. It can be difficult to get professional people into a position like that, be what one is you want job security. Two, I think after a certain number of years, even if you're limited service, we have an option if there are layoffs of. Staying within the agency, but if you're a professional engineer for Dan. How much sense does it make for you to be offered a job on repairing buffers or something? I think it helps with getting. Was getting on a sustainable basis, professional staff. Thank you very much. Are we seeing you again this morning?
Not this morning,
But later this week,
later this week on
2:58.
wildlife management and then batteries.
That's right. Great. And I'm not in a rush, but I'll come see you like we could. When you check in, it's fine for our walkthrough.
Okay,
Um,
is there something that needs to change?
well, Elcar raised objections that were then certified,
Okay, yeah,
and because Elcar is speaking on behalf of the General Assembly, my sense is it would be appropriate for the committee to think about carrying forward explicitly provisions that Elcar objected to in the bill.
understood.
Yeah.
Understood.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you. All right, thank you, Michael. Ken McDonald, good to see you back.
Thank you. Okay,
And Senator McCormick, good morning.
Good morning. I
Uh,
was actually, this was a last minute decision. I was planning on coming in person. I thought one more day on Zoom just as a caution.
okay,
I'll see you live tomorrow.
Chris, do you have what I have?
no, I think everything, last week while you were out, I was generally the only person in the room. And everyone else was remote, although Sarah Watson was not very remote, she was across the hall and down.
On the way.
Lights, remote light, all right,
I tested negative again this morning, so all is well. Just
everyone was
belt and
being.
suspenders.
Taking the precautionary approach last week. Senator White is traveling and at some point this morning, like 10:30, we'll be able to join us remotely, but doesn't have a connection at the moment. Right, so with that, we're jumping ahead. Senator Hardy, good morning.
Good morning.
We're interested in learning S219 and that's related to municipal regulation of private airstrips.
Awesome. Thank you for having me, everyone. Good morning. I'm Ruth Hardy, Senator from the Addison District, the other senator from the Addison District.
Here we're here, she would say, the junior senator.
The junior senator from the Addison District. I love
Me
being.
all the time, I was always the junior senator.
Yeah, it's fine. I'm fine with being junior. Depends on feeling now. So S219 is a bill, as you mentioned, municipal regulation of private airstrips. I introduced this bill, because, as you probably know, Senator Gray, in our district in Lincoln, there's been quite a bit of, consternation about, at least one, possibly two proposed private airstrips. And whether or not the town has the authority to regulate those airstrips like they do through their development review process. These are, as they sound, a place where planes can land and take off. And so it is definitely development that comes with a certain amount of disruption for people in who might be in neighboring properties, and so their development review board was reviewing these as they would with other development. But there is apparently now a court case, which I believe may have been referred to the Supreme Court about whether or not municipalities have the authority to regulate private airstrips. So this bill would just make it clear that municipalities do have the ability to regulate private airstrips in the same way that they do other types of development. I did not include in the bill anything related to Act 250, frankly, because I was trying to spare your committee from getting the bill, but you got the bill anyway. So you might look at whether or not it makes sense to include a provision clarifying that private airstrips are also covered by Act 250. I believe they are in some towns or some areas do them and some don't, so it is also a little bit unclear. So this was just supposed to be clarity purposes. I will let Alan get into the weeds with you, because I know she loves these kinds of weeds. But I would suggest, as I think I've already sent you, Senator Bray, having our constituent to talk with you, and I'm going to pull up her name. I have Sarah Laird, who lives in Lincoln, and is very knowledgeable about the situation. I'm happy to provide you with her contact information. There also is an organization that's been working on this issue called Save Our Airspace, I think, or something to that effect. And yes, Save Vermont Airspace. And they have a website, savebtairspace.org, that has a lot of information about this. It's been an issue in a number of communities around the state. I believe in Grand Isle, the town of South Hero was dealing with this as well, and also may have even taken a vote on an airspace, a private airstrip there. I don't know the details, but having somebody in from South Hero might be interesting as well. And obviously, you would want to hear from people who have private airstrips and want private airstrips, but I hope you'll hear from a lot of people who are concerned about them and the impact they have on neighborhoods, but also the impact they have on the environment, particularly in really rural places like Lincoln.
Sure. Yeah, jurisdictionally, so the community does land use and planning, like, although people focus on Act 250, Title 10. It also includes Title 24 municipal planning, so that's how. Why, I think it's.
I was assuming because it was municipal regulation, it would come to GovOps and, but I'm happy to have you all take care of it and take a look at it. And we obviously have Senator Watson and Senator White who come over there in the afternoon, so, and since.
We're well connected here.
Exactly, and since you're my seatmate and you're the senator for the town of Lincoln as well, that makes a lot of sense, so happy to have you guys do it.
Okay, and in the case of Lincoln, was it for helicopters? More than, I don't know that it was planes, I thought it was helicopters.
I think it was both, but it was definitely planes because. And I don't want to say anything I shouldn't say, or don't know about, but I believe it was an executive at an airplane company who wanted the ability to fly his personal plane in and out of his property.
Okay,
But again, I would defer to people who know more about the situation. So I think it was both. I think they also wanted to have a helipad sort of landing, and that's why I think it's more generic in the statutes. It includes both, and Ellen can talk to you about that, but it includes both planes and helicopters in the definition of airstrips.
where did jetpacks come?
Pardon me?
Jetpacks, are they?
Jetpacks, I don't know about jetpacks, that hasn't come up in the conversation, but you certainly take testimony on it and maybe have a field trip.
Maybe a demonstration.
Yes.
Volunteers, can we volunteer?
Well, I hope they have 5.
For the jet,
I
for
think
the
everyone.
Yeah, Ann wants to jet.
That's not, yeah.
Anyway, so that's this little bill and why it came to be.
Okay,
So thank you very much for taking it up and considering it.
thank you. And if you could, share any kind of information you have with Jude, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll send you this stuff. Cool,
Thank you.
thank you very much, good luck with
Are there
everything.
any questions for Senator Harvey?
Okay, I know you have a lot on your plate, so I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Chakowski, can you join us and do the official bill walk on 219, please? And for Mr. Anderson, so we're gonna try to go, we'll go to you first rather than the sponsoring senator. That'd be a commitment after you, right?
Yes,
Okay,
thank you.
yeah. Good morning, good to see you. I think this might be our first bill walkthrough of the session.
Yes, happy new year. Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. I am here on S 219, Senator Harvey's bill. It's very short. So on page 1, section 1 is amending 4411 in title 24, which establishes the parameters for zoning bylaws. So a municipality may regulate land development in conformance with its adopted municipal plan and for the purposes set forth in section 4302 of this title. To govern the land, the use of land and the placement, spacing and size of structures. And other factors specified in the bylaws related to public health, safety or welfare. Zoning bylaws may permit, prohibit, restrict, regulate, and determine land development, including the following. So then it has a list of things that are included, and as we know from other statutes, including is not a limiting, it is not the exhaustive list. But language has been added, as Senator Hardy said, on page 2 to really be specific about airstrips. So on page 2, added to this list is location, construction, repair, maintenance, and alteration of restricted landing areas as defined in 5 VSA 202. So I did consult with Anthea Dexter Cooper on this issue because she's the transportation attorney in our office. And we did go back and forth about what the proper term is, because airstrip is not widely used. And also helipads are an issue in this area. So we went with restricted landing area, which is a term used in Title V. And a restricted landing area is an area of land or water or both that is used or is made available for the landing and takeoff of aircraft. The use of which, except for in the case of emergency, shall be used only as provided from time to time by the Transportation Board. So the Transportation Board issues permits for restricted landing areas. And restricted landing areas do include a broad range of things, but they do specifically include private landing strips and helipads.
Okay, so restricted landing area. I don't see that in here, so how you were saying that was the term you're using, so is that what's in 5 VSA 202?
On page 2, line 11.
Oh, sorry, I read it right. I knew I was gonna read right.
That's the whole crux of this bill
I knew I was
is
gonna read
restricted
right
landing
after that
area.
question. Because I was concentrating on the site.
No, yes, I gave you a lot of information. So the definition I read you is what is in 202.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry, yes.
How about, so in the list of things, location, construction, repair, maintenance, alteration. Those all seem infrastructure oriented. How about operations? Like, I mean, because I would think it's not so much, yes. Building of such a thing, but it's gonna be. As best I understand from emails I've heard, it's noise related to aircraft coming and going. That was the subject of some discussion.
So this is where it gets a little tricky because the Transportation Board has jurisdiction over the actual aviation use.
Okay,
So municipalities, and I am of the opinion that private airstrips are already covered by the existing zoning bylaw statute. However, there has been question raised because it is not specifically enumerated, towns have been confused. However, a number of towns do have bylaws already regarding airstrips. But as I mentioned on the first page, towns currently have the authority, primarily have the authority in their bylaws to regulate public health, safety, and welfare. So they have some ability to regulate. But primarily, their jurisdiction in this area is structural related, because that is a lot of what zoning bylaws do. They do have ability to condition their permits. So. But there is the overarching jurisdiction of the transportation board also.
okay. So what would, how is it that some towns already have bylaws related to air strips?
So I did sort of just say. The language on page 1 uses the phrase including the following.
Yeah.
And that is not.
Right.
It's not limited.
Right.
So it includes, but not limited to the following things. There are also some other provisions specifically related to airports. Specified in zoning, so towns do have jurisdiction. In other places specifically related to airports, but again, I do think. Towns have broad authority to regulate almost all of the uses that could happen on land. And I do think helipads and airstrips are among them.
Sure.
However, I do think some towns are, first of all, I think some towns have not thought about it before.
Right,
And some towns have had issues come up, so they specifically included it. But then also I think some towns are conservative and wanting to see specified language, but you may want to hear. I'm of the opinion that it's already there, but this makes it very clear.
okay, do you know the sort of the legal history of this? I mean, for instance, in this case. I thought Senator Harding referenced that this could be going to court.
I was not aware that it was going to court, and I'd like to follow up on that, because I was not aware of that.
Okay, I mean, it sounds like you're saying if they have broad authority. And then a town proceeds. Based on its understanding that it has that broad authority. And then someone could bring a case asserting that they don't have that authority, then it would be good for us to know, because you're picking. You're picking the restricted landing area approach to managing this issue, but there's more than one way we could get there. It could be that they would just have to go their existing law. The bylaws, they could write bylaws on it. Is that your legal opinion?
I think the authority already exists.
Yeah.
But this makes it very clear.
Okay, and that legal authority that already exists, does it have to relate to public health, safety, or welfare?
No, it's the other part of that statement about the regulation of the use of land.
Okay. The clause related to public health, safety, or welfare qualifies what before it, not. Doesn't it? I thought that qualified like everything preceding.
So this is the statute that establishes that towns regulate the use of land. So that is the governing language for all other land use under municipal bylaws, so it shouldn't, it's not. There's no difference here. In what towns are already doing in all other areas related to land use permitting. That is the governing principle of health, safety, and welfare, which is related to their police power. So to protect their community. So that's the justification they have.
Does someone need to make a case, for instance, that public safety, planes can wreck, right? So someone say, well, we don't want something as dangerous as a plane flying into our neighborhood. Is that sort of the basis for making that
No,
restriction? No, it's just that they already have the ability to regulate land, period, full stop.
yes, because they have the authority to regulate public health, safety and welfare.
Do they have to make a case that their decision, their bylaw is based on their interpretation of public health, safety, or welfare? I mean, is it unlimited? Or does it have to be based on that? Like someone's gonna need to make a public safety argument, for instance, in this case. Does that make sense, my question?
It does, so they do not have unlimited authority. Because you may recall 4412 is a long list of things that they cannot regulate in zoning. This is a broad provision giving them authority to regulate the use of land. So I don't think so, however, I'm not 100% certain, and I could go back and look at the case law that establishes this, but I don't think so. When towns establish their town plans and then develop bylaws to implement that plan, they are operating under the. They're doing so to protect the public health and safety.
Thank you. Can you check and see if their legal is actually asserted by law that then, or just the legal status of this issue being used?
Sure.
Thank you. I don't know what's happened precisely, but I hear people discussing it from time to time, but it'd be good to know where we stand and if there's a case. Okay. Sorry to monopolize questions, but I've been hearing about this for maybe a year. For the other one. Any other committee questions for council? Senator McCormick and then Senator McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just expanding a little bit, or just continuing the chair's line of questioning. The extent to which the municipalities have jurisdiction, can that jurisdiction extend to deciding whether or not there are parts of town where there simply should not be helipads or landing strips? Just
Yes,
banning it outright.
yes.
That does, okay. And what about, is there any preemption issue? The feds regulate air flight. I guess the state does as well. Is there any hierarchy of authority? Who trumps who? And the traditional use of the word Trump.
So I would need to get back to you on that. My initial answer is no. The federal aid, there is some preemption of regulation of aviation generally. However, this is specific to the location of these facilities, and the state transportation board does have authority in this area. And they have a guidance document that they have related to someone seeking a permit for a private airstrip, and they have said that they look to first if the town has restrictions on the location. So they include it in their analysis whether or not the municipality has restrictions on locations. So I am not an aviation attorney, that would be Anthea, and so I can get back to you if you need to know that specifically, but I do think that the state does have authority in the physical placement of these facilities. It's just that there are other aspects that the state can't, that a town perhaps can't regulate.
Following by Senator McCormick. Question. Are you all set, Senator?
I'm
McCormick?
done. Yeah, that's thanks, Al.
Do you happen to know, or maybe this is a question for Ms. Dexter Cooper, if the transportation board can set things like hours of operation, frequency of flights, stuff like that.
Yes.
Well, once again, a small thing turned out to block the person. Senator McDonald.
I've got two airports and landing strips in Washington, one in Randolph. And a fourth one that it's the most active in Bedford, that in addition to flying in and out, they pull gliders up, but the gliders fly around and down land. And they do a balloon test where they take, when balloons get off. One of which landed in my front yard. And the balloon collapsed on my tractor. It came out the front door. Now, you don't hear those things land. My tractor was festooned with a balloon drape. So there's more to this than.
Yes, and that is.
I only had one traffic light, but I got, cellular.
Yeah, and so I will say that's why, sorry, initially Senator Hardy had requested the word airstrip. But that was why, after consulting with Anthea, restricted landing area does encompass some of these other things besides a traditional plane landing strip.
The Brookfield Elementary School used to have a helicopter that landed across the road from it. So they actually had a helicopter, and eventually it got old and it was too expensive to maintain, so the guy sold it. It just used to come and go as it saw fit.
Yes, I have heard that some of the permits issued by the state board are a bit broad in their authority for landing.
Great. Well, thank you for introducing it short, but intriguing though. More to come. Thanks so much. Senator Harrison, normally we have the sponsor of the bill go first, but Mr. Anderson has to go to another committee shortly, so can we flip the order? Have council do the walkthrough first, and then we'll turn to you for the why you introduced this part of the story.
Of course.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Anderson, good morning. Nice to see you. We don't usually see you in here.
Yeah, good morning. For the record, Tucker Anderson, Legislative Council. This is only my second time in this committee. That's 7 years.
We'll work
So,
hard to find things.
yeah. Great, once every other biennium.
Yes.
So good morning. You have in front of you S-227. The big picture here is that this bill is attempting to make express authority for municipalities to include the siting and location of transit amenities as part of their review process and as part of their municipal plans and maps. So starting in section 1, and I'm going to jump to page 2. This is in 24 VSA section 4414 and subdivision for me, which governs conditional uses before a permit or put on a permit. And the new subdivision B5, this would incorporate required connections or improvements to existing infrastructure. And then there's a list of sidewalks, public streets, transit facilities, bicycle lanes, or similar community facilities on directly adjacent properties. So the two kind of restrictive components here are that this would allow the municipality to include in the conditional uses required connections or improvements to existing infrastructure on their directly adjacent properties. So imagine required connection to a bike path that is adjacent to the property that is filing for the permit.
So currently, if you, without this, it is, well, whatever, it's somewhat debatable whether or not a permit can be issued contingent upon making such connections, and this is to make that clear.
Yes,
It's permissible.
correct. Similar to the last issue that you took up, there is a debate as to whether municipalities have the sufficient or express authority to incorporate the siting and location of transit amenities as part of development review.
That makes me wonder why we're in a different section, not the same place, but in statute, but it's, 4411 versus 4414. Did you think, can you fill us in, because you were hearing that conversation, that we're
Yeah.
both talking about what sounds main regulatory zone.
Uh. Quick answer, it's because this is attached to conditions that can be placed on the issuance of a permit at the local level, and that's the mechanism
Yeah.
that is being chosen here.
Sure.
Rather than the broader grant authority
Yeah.
that I'm just talking about.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Any questions for council?
Feeling clear.
The next couple are very easy, I hope, we'll find out.
Yeah.
In section 2, 24 VSA, section 4416 is amended. This deals with site plan review. So the review of the plan for the development of a site, there's an exception in there for some residential properties. But this is dealing with the adequacy of public transit facilities as part of that site plan review. You'll see the addition of that 3-word clause on line 18. So this would now be incorporated into the site plan process expressly.
Alright, so can you fill us in a little bit, public transit facilities?
Sure.
I mean, for instance, our sidewalks, public transit facilities in some way.
Working on this issue, I could not find a uniform standard definition of what that 3-word clause would be legally, but I can tell you that the intent behind this includes things such as bus shelters, not specifically. Right? The term facilities there.
Well, consider Harrison's good, so she can fill us in what's going on, where she lives and why they need it.
Senator Harrison has been working on this for a while, so I think that she'll probably have a ton of useful information.
Okay, no questions there, let's keep going.
Similarly, section 3, amending 24 VSA, section 4421, this is the section that deals with the adoption of official maps by the municipality. And this allows the municipality the discretionary authority to adopt an official map that identifies, in this case, future public transit facilities. If you look on the page, line 9, page 3, that's where the clause is added. And in section 4, we amend 24 VSA, section 4432. This relates to the supporting plans to the municipal plan. And this allows discretionary authority for the municipality to adopt a supporting plan. Specifically in subdivision 4, page 4, the transportation master plan. This allows the municipality to adopt a plan to guide the location of future transportation facilities, including roadways, sidewalks, trails, bicycle facilities, and public transit.
So the transportation master plan is an entirely new concept.
Yes, to make it express that this sort of funding can be adopted as part of the support funds.
I'm surprised that it's a new thing, but
The
I got more from the
yes,
Bill's concept.
the current list for supporting plan authority is somewhat abbreviated and specific. There are 3 existing subdivisions. If you want information on that, after you provide as a committee, you also have your excellent Act 250 zoning attorney, which I'm sure is just so eager to jump in. And full disclosure, we may be taking this over in the future of this.
Wow,
Yes.
once every 7 years, it's turning out to
Yeah.
be much. Alright, lots of.
That list you mentioned about supporting plan, that is an exhaustive list, or it is not exhaustive.
We go back to the introductory language, determine that before I provide.
But may include, so it's gotta be non-exhaustive.
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions for council on this? Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hope we finished on time for you to be where you need to be.
You're gonna get me there in time. I'll have time to bore Senate Transportation with some archaic law about things like gores and
Delightful.
measurements. They somehow got the new mapping data bill.
Oh, they did.
Senator Watson is one of the co-sponsors, so they're taking it up this morning.
Oh, very good.
You have to talk to them about US standard feet versus international feet,
Yeah.
how it's gonna improve mapping systems.
Tell them we should just go to metric. the whole thing, all of it.
I regularly commute through a Gore, which has a state highway through it. I don't know if the other Gores have any infrastructure.
As you know, I live very close to the Gore,
Yeah,
and there's no signs because the community rejected putting up any signs to let people know they're in the Gore.
yeah,
They don't need to know.
it's kind of a club on us. Thank you. Okay, Senator Harrison, thanks for waiting. So, now we usually do it in the other order. So what's going on that you're seeing that makes you want to introduce, S227, please?
Yeah, thank you. And I actually like going in that order. To me, it's helpful. So I am here to introduce S227, which authorizes municipalities to require the siting and installation of public transit amenities, as you heard. And the purpose of this bill is to provide clear authority by the state for towns to require these facilities during development review and to also formally plan for the facilities. Towns can require sidewalks and bicycle facilities, but not bus signs, benches, or shelters on private property. Transit amenities such as signs, benches, and shelters are important to maintain and increase ridership. Transit, for me, checks all the boxes. It connects people with jobs, schools, medical care, family, and friends, reduces traffic and fossil fuel emissions, increases social connections, and supports cultural events. And the more people ride transit, the better our system can be, as the cost per rider decrease and the system becomes more responsive to the community. Sometimes the bus stop needs to be located on private property, and it's best to add amenities when the property is being developed or redeveloped so that the property owner can fit them into the overall plan. The Act 250 process does include consideration of public transit stops, but the statutes governing municipal review do not, and I was surprised by this. So the bill includes authorization for towns to include transit facilities in maps depicting future municipal improvements, and adds a transportation master plan to the list of plans that can support the municipal plan. I worked with a group of planners across the state, actually. This isn't just in my area, it's a problem statewide, to draft the bill and discuss the bill at the Public Transit Advisory Council last month. I have not heard any concern so far from the transit providers or the towns. Something that's important to me about this bill, and another one that won't be in your committee, is to improve planning and coordination between towns and the 7 public transit providers serving the state. I think it will be best for both entities to improve that coordination. The only comment I've heard about the bill is to use the term transit amenities instead of transit facilities, because facilities could include buildings such as garages, and that's not at all the intent of this bill.
Thank you.
So I am happy to answer any questions you may have and hope that you will support this bill. Okay, and I noticed that the title of the bill is actually transit amenities. So
Yes,
I'm not sure actually why within the bill that term of art changes. compared to the title.
exactly. I don't know either, and that might be a question for Ledge Council.
Right, well, we're looking for a way to make Mr. Anderson come back. All right, and so I was just thinking, a lot of times bus stops, you think, oh, well, they'll be in the public right of way, but I can also imagine something like a shopping center. And you might want a bus to be able to safely drop people off within the shopping center as opposed to make them
Exactly.
debus on the street or whatever.
Yes, and something I saw happen in 2 separate communities on opposite side of the states was that an existing bus stop that was working well before a project was redeveloped, after the redevelopment, the bus stop was worse. And that was even when the town had some notice that it should consider the bus stop as part of the redevelopment.
Okay. So that sounds like it goes back to the section on required connections as a condition to allow them to make that a condition in the issuance of a permit.
Right, well, that's under just conditional use, just in general site plan review is as important, I think.
Okay. All right,
And I appreciate it with the planners were the ones who came up with the specific language. And it was very helpful to have their draft of the bill.
did you work with VACTA on this?
It was a subset of VAPTA. It was a planner from Winooski, and then 2 regional commission. Well, I can tell you it was Eric Vorwald, Jason Rasmussen, and Chris Campany who worked on the draft.
Okay, could you please email those contacts to the committee, to our committee assistant, Judith Newman? That way, when it's time to get witnesses, we'll be able to reach those folks directly.
Certainly.
Any other suggested witnesses based on your development of the draft so far?
Do you think you would need witnesses to state the importance of amenities? Just the importance of shelters and benches?
Sure, I mean, it would be helpful to better understand, I mean, yes, short answer, yes.
I mean, it might be relatively obvious, but just the importance of having a bench, having a shelter. But
Those folks, yeah, if there's someone outside of the 3-year thing, I'm imagining based on Chris Campany being in here before, he could provide that kind of information, but if there's someone else. I know, for instance, in our area, the folks who run Addison County, what was Addison County Transit, so, not to hear from that. Anyone, did you hear any pushback from private landowners, developers, et cetera?
no, I did not, but I haven't reached out to them.
Okay. Great. Any committee questions for Senator Harris?
Thank you.
All right, thanks very much. Sounds like a helpful thing. If you're gonna make public transit work and make it as comfortable as possible to use. I took a trip to Denver and then to the National Renewable Energy Lab, and I said, I'm gonna use all public transit from the time I landed at the airport. And it took me as long to get from Vermont to Denver, is from the airport to the National Renewable Energy Lab as it did to travel by plane from Vermont to Denver. Because it was not a seamless system with amenities along the way.
Yes, and Denver actually has a good reputation for transit. But when you're comparing that, you need to look at the time it takes at the airport too, but that's another conversation.
Sure. Well, from the airport to town, there's a light rail for, was great. But once I needed to get off that and start using buses, finish the trip, it became a lot harder and slower.
Right, that's why they need to be more frequent and more, it needs to be more obvious where they are too.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah. I think I'm here for another bill also.
Oh, yes, that's right. It's a double header today. We have, so I'll just read it for anyone who's following, this S-228, an affidavit for requiring a jurisdictional opinion to be exempt from Act 250. Yes, so we do have counsel here, and you just said that you like counsel doing the walkthrough first. Do you want to switch up the order compared to our agenda and have Mr. Kowski do the walkthrough the bill before you speak to it?
If that works for you.
Sure. Ms. Chakowski.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm now here on S-228. So last year in the Home Act, also known as Act 47 or S 100. You established a number of temporary exemptions from Act 250, raising the thresholds. And as part of that exemption, you included this session law provision that directs anyone seeking to take use of the exemption to request a jurisdictional opinion from the district coordinator, so that it could assert that the project was indeed exempt. This bill S 228 would be amending that language. So on page 1, section 1. If-
Can I pause just, I just want to make sure if you remember these more fully. So there was an exemption in order to provide a legal basis to certify that someone qualified for that exemption. They would apply and then they would get a jurisdictional. They would apply as though they needed a permit, but then they would be informed that in fact you don't. And the form in which because of the exemption. And the form in which they get that legal notice is in the form of a jurisdictional opinion. So it's really certifying your exemption that the next.
Certifying your exemption, yes, and it also serves the purpose of some record keeping, for how many people are actually using the exemption.
Okay.
And the exemptions we're talking about specifically are removing the cap on the priority housing projects. And construction of 25 or more units, 24 or fewer units of housing located in the downtown neighborhood development area, village center with permanent zoning and subdivision bylaw, or growth center.
25, when you say 25, 20, sorry.
Sorry, at the 25th unit triggered Act 250.
Right,
So you can build up to 23 units and remain exempt under this provision.
okay, as opposed to the
9
9
that occur
in the current, okay,
Yes.
got it,
So the language in section 1 would read, if construction of a development initiated under the exemptions established in 10 VSA 6001 3A 11 and 3D 8.3 will not be completed before June 30th, 2026. A person shall request a jurisdictional opinion under 10 VSA 6007 on or before June 30th, 2026. The jurisdictional opinion shall include a requirement that the project be substantially complete on or before June 30th, 2029 in order to remain exempt. So this is changing this because currently this provision is already in effect. And I believe the jurisdictional opinions have begun to be requested. And so this is moving the date back to when a jurisdictional opinion would actually need to be required until 2026. Sorry, let me say that again. Currently, this provision is already in statute. They need to get a jurisdictional opinion regardless. This is saying if the project will not be complete before 2026, when the sunset runs out, then they need to get a jurisdictional opinion. So it's changing who needs to actually get the jurisdictional opinion.
can you say that one again, I just want to make sure that, like.
So this
Let me try.
law passed last year.
Yeah.
And so people are already required to get a jurisdictional opinion if they want to use this exemption. This is changing that requirement, however, to say that you will only need a jurisdictional opinion if the project will not be complete before the sunset is over.
Okay, and I thought that the reason we required was just to ensure that there was a clear legal record of your ability to claim exemption. So that, yeah, you might be done before 2026 on your project. But
Yes.
someone, I don't know. Perhaps someone, there could be a complainant who said, oh, you should have had an Act 250 permit, and rather than end up with a court case, well, or you'd end up with one anyway. But the jail would be, might be, it would be dismissed before it ever gets heard.
So last year when you were contemplating this bill, there were a couple of things that I think the multiple committees were interested in. Yes, it will serve that function you just stated, but the other thing it does is a clear record keeping of who is using this exemption. And that helps not only for clarity under the legal scheme, but also provides data for how many projects are using this exemption. And where they are located and how many units they will have.
Right, okay. Right, because if you wanted to measure impact relative to pre-existing law, you would need some way of recording.
And also currently, priority housing projects are exempt, certain priority housing projects are already exempt under Act 250, and often. Those project developers seek a jurisdictional opinion to do sort of what you just stated, which was have clarity. That they are exempt, that they have met the requirements of the statute. So it's extending it further because of this unusual sunset provision.
Okay. Thank you. I can see how, I guess, we'll ask Senator Harrison for the rationale. Yeah, I think some people may consider it burdensome to request the jurisdictional opinion to begin with. I got one. Senator Watson, you're actually a co-sponsor, maybe you want to speak for the bill and the rationale for it.
Well, I have a question. Could you just, I feel like I am inferring what a jurisdictional opinion is and what its function is, but could you? I want to not be assuming things, so could you just like help me understand what a jurisdictional opinion is and what it does?
Sure, so under 6007, any person currently under the statute can request a jurisdictional opinion. And that goes to the district coordinator who looks at the project plans. And then reviews the statute to determine if the project would fall into Act 250 jurisdiction. Or wouldn't, and so they do an initial sort of legal review of whether or not a permit will be needed for a project.
So it's like an initial, and is it something that people would refer back to like later if somebody questions? Like, yes, you know, we think you needed a permit, get one, and you'd be like, hey, I have this jurisdictional opinion.
Yes,
Okay.
and that particularly comes up if. Yes.
Okay, okay. And. Okay, I think it's reasonable.
Right, so I can imagine along those lines, like on priority housing projects where there are criteria in order to qualify as the percentage of units that are affordable, the terms of affordability, stuff like that. Someone might say, wait, that project actually should never have been exempt, but the JO would make it clear that it merited exemption or not, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So under the current, like without this bill, if somebody starts a project, you think they would be getting a jurisdictional opinion anyway to say that they're exempt, or could they not get that jurisdictional opinion and assume that they are exempt?
Some of them may have done it. A lot of the priority housing project developers do it already because they want that assurance. But because you were adding a new type of exemption, which was for regular, like market rate housing. Without the provision in section 16A, no one would have been required to do this. And some of them may have sought to do it, but they were not required to do it.
Okay. And so this makes it clearer that. That they do need, no, that they do not, it's clear that they do not need a jurisdictional opinion. As long as the project is complete. No, wait,
Yes.
Yes, if it's complete by a certain date.
This bill would be changing the law that you passed last year and not requiring it unless the project was going to be complete.
Okay, thank you.
Right, if you're going to meet the last date by which you can get the exemption, which then still lasts for, is it up to 3 years that you can complete after? So if you file June 30th, you could be good to go for 3 more years. And this is really saying, so you would have to do it in those cases because the exemption would be gone, and you'd want to claim. You'd want to claim that authority prior to the end of the exemption, okay? But if you're not, if you're gonna be done by the June 30th, 2026, just saying, we should be good to go, we don't need it at all.
Yeah, and part of the other reason this was added in that bill was, because I'm not aware of a sunset of exemption before. And projects that are exempt from Act 250 jurisdiction can potentially come under Act 250 jurisdiction in the future. If they trigger substantial change jurisdiction. And so this is also providing a mechanism to see what the initial project was. And if there's construction later to the project, that will have a clear record of if there would need to be a permit 10 years from now or 5 years from now.
I see, okay. And we have the chair of the NFB with us, I think, are you, good morning, Ms. Hess, are you here
I'm here to listen.
to listen?
Yes.
And so, in Europe, so this is really an NRB fair question, but maybe you have enough experience with it, you can answer anything, and that is. In order to get a JO issue. Is anything more than a letter to the district commission requesting a review of the project? And the request for a JO jurisdiction is required.
As an initial step, I think so, but the jurisdictional opinion does require a review of the project plans.
Right. Okay. Right, any. Oh, sorry, Senator McCormick, not good on seeing the little yellow hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just, I presume everyone knows that I think Act 250 exemptions used as an incentive are a fundamentally bad idea. Having said that, this is the law. It's supposed to work. I would appreciate it if council could more or less go over everything that you've just said, but structuring it in a different way, namely a before and after. I'm a developer. What do I have to do now? What would I have to do after the bill passes? What's the difference?
If a developer of housing is seeking to be exempt from Act 250 under last year's bill, currently, they need to get a jurisdictional opinion from the district coordinator asserting that they are in fact exempt and that they've met the requirements of the exemption. Were you to pass this bill, the developer would only need to get a jurisdictional opinion if the project was not going to be complete before June 30th, 2026. So it would
But
be.
isn't that all right? But there was a sort of a drop dead date on this arrangement already, so wasn't that already the case?
No, so the drop dead date is July 1, 2026.
That's what it is now. And the bill changes it to what?
No. This would be, less people would need a jurisdictional opinion if you pass this bill. Because only those who would not have completed construction by June 30, 2026 would then need a JO. I think you may want to hear from the sponsor at some point.
Okay. I still don't, I mean, I've been listening carefully and I don't fully get what this bill does.
I'll take a whack at it and then I'll ask council to correct me when I go make a mistake. Under the current exemption, you have all the way through June 30th, 2029 to build and use this exemption. But you would have had to, you would have started construction, correct, by 2026, June 30th. The point would be, so under current law, you get a JO that said you, during this period through 2026, you get the opinion that certifies you're exempt. You can invoke that exemption and now you have up to 6 years actually to build the thing. This would say, hey, if you're done before the exemption sunsets, which is June 30th, 2026, you don't even need to bother to get the JO. You just, the exemption exists. Rest assured, go ahead and do your project. But there'll be no legal record by virtue of a lack of a JO that you qualify for that exemption. So I think it seems to pivot on whether or not you want a legal record that demonstrates your project qualified for the exemption. As opposed to presuming that it does in some way.
It lessens the reach of Act 250 a little more than previously.
It's less explicit. I think we should probably hear from,
I wouldn't characterize it that way.
I'm sorry?
I wouldn't necessarily characterize it that way.
less explicit.
How would you phrase it?
Yeah.
Less people will need a JO under this language.
To get the exemption.
Yes.
Okay, so more, it'll be easier for more people to get the exemption. Yes, no?
It's not changing necessarily the legal standard. I guess technically, if getting the JO is an impediment to someone getting the exemption, I think you should hear from the sponsor.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All right, Senator Harrison, so good that we had this walkthrough. So now the topic's cooking already.
Right, it's definitely cooking. And okay, so I do have a question for council, but I think Ellen, you're staying, right? You'll be here? Okay. So I am here to introduce 228. So S100 included 2 temporary Act 250 exemptions. I'm concerned specifically with the language raising the cap from 10 to 25 units in certain designated areas. I should say threshold. The threshold to be in Act 250 has been for years 10 housing units. Act 100 increased that cap to 25 housing units in certain designated areas. The purpose of those exemptions, at least when it was in our committee, and it may have changed along the way, was to spur housing development in appropriate areas for a limited amount of time. It was also to incentivize and encourage towns to apply for additional and expanded designated areas. And thirdly, to provide a test of the influence of Act 250 in discouraging certain types of projects. So we heard compelling testimony last year that builders restrict the size of projects to 9 units, even when they have the capacity to build 10 or more, so that they're under the threshold and not subject to Act 250. This is one reason, as I said, that S100 increased the threshold to 25 units in designated downtowns, neighborhood development areas, village centers with permanent zoning and bylaws, and growth centers for 3 years from July 2023 to through June 30, 2026. So we've already started. We're already in that time period. The conditions during the exemption period were intended to replicate the same conditions as when builders kept their total unit count at 9, changing only the unit count in the specific areas. So builders of units less than 9, let me start. The builders of projects less than 9 units at that time, when we did the bill, did not currently need a jurisdictional opinion. They're intimidated by the process. Jurisdictional opinions are also appealable, which could present a problem. So requiring a jurisdictional opinion for the increment between 9 and 24 was not the intention at that time in the bill's progress, because it would decrease likely the number of projects and units built. And the reason I think it is not useful as a measurement is that there will be less to measure. I think the value of using the JOs as a measurement of the influence of the bill is not the best way. We should find another way to measure. And if measure is, I believe we need more data, but that method of measurement actually will reduce the amount of housing built, because the JO is a disincentive to builders. And I can get you information from witnesses. Hopefully they'll be willing to testify to that. But it is just anything having to do with Act 250, reasonable or not, is truly a disincentive for builders. And I'll leave it at that. The deadline of the JO of June 30, 2026, that deadline was originally proposed, in my recollection, because it was a way to prove that a project was initiated within the time frame of the exemption. And I think if we're going to require a JO for any of these projects, I would think that we would want the JO at or before the time of construction. It doesn't make sense to me to require a JO years after a project is completed. So I think that's an inconsistency that needs to be looked at. And then developers of priority housing projects, that's a different group entirely. I think they are likely familiar with the JO process, and it's not as intimidating for them. And the bill could be modified to keep the requirement for the priority housing projects with a more logical time frame, so that they would need to get the JO before they initiated the project. The last point I want to make is just that there are multiple bills proposed this session that include changes to Act 250 and delegation of authority to municipalities, some of which may cause this language to be moot. But because the timeline for many of these things, like the plan that includes the capability maps and the level 3 maps, those won't be completed until 2026. I think it's important to have this exemption language clean and understandable and easy to use, so that we can get housing built in these areas where we all agree housing should be built in the next 2.5 years. It concerns me that we're burning daylight. You know, we need housing. That was a good plan to have this a temporary exemption, and I hope the language can be updated to make it work. So my question to the council, unless Senator McCormick, do you want to ask a question first?
Senator McCormick, go ahead, please.
Okay.
You are Your microphone is back off.
I just wanted to get into the queue. Senator Harrison is speaking. I don't want to interrupt her.
Okay, and I was finished, so sorry, but, council, would someone want it, would a builder building 9 units or less be required to get a JO now that this language is in effect?
If they're seeking to use the exemption.
So using the exemption means increasing between 10, more than 9 and less than 25. The question came to me when you were explaining the current language.
Okay.
I'd actually say no, it would be for the provision in S-100 states that the construction of housing units in the certain designated areas up to 25 units are exempt. So I read that to anyone seeking to do that would require a JO. Not just between 9 and 24.
Wow. So that's something that they're not required to, or they were not required to do before this bill. So that, honestly, I really think that should be fixed because we're discouraging housing if we're doing that.
That would sound like an unintended consequence if we swept up people from 1 through 9. Get a JO.
Exactly.
They weren't getting JOs. Okay. Because it's not really using the exemption. Building 24 fewer units. As opposed to claiming the exemption. Okay. Does that sound, is that your, so that's your reading comment, like the exemption now sort of created an obligation for people building only 1 through 9 units as opposed to 10 through 24.
I'd like to think about it.
Okay,
I hadn't thought about this in a while, so I will.
so I'll put a question mark next to that. All right. Thank you. So Senator Harrison, I have a question. So have you talked to builders who have said that they used to be fine building up through 9 units? That was no sweat, like they knew they were exempt. But now they're considering building up to 24 and they don't want to do it even with this exemption in place because the requirement to get a jurisdictional opinion is too burdensome in some way.
I've heard it in our committee meetings last year, we got testimony from developers who said they intentionally stay under the 9. They stay at the 9 units because they don't want to interact with Act 250 and they're intimidated. The conversations I've had since then have been not in committee because we haven't discussed this. But yes, folks have told me that getting a JO is an impediment that would stop them. Yes. I mean, what they do is they just move to another place, right? They just do 999. But it's unfortunate.
All right. Well, I guess we'll have to take some testimony and find out how burdensome it is. I sense from my own participation firsthand in the world of construction is by the time you're building 24 units, you have some sophisticated capacity, and a letter requesting a JO would seem manageable, but I haven't had to manage that. So and want to learn more. And then you also raised the possibility of an appeal of a JO. I'm not sure on what basis, when we have the threshold, it seems relatively clearly defined and explicit, like 24 units, 20%. We'll just stick to the 24 unit one. I don't know how someone would, where the gray area would be in such a jurisdictional opinion. And I'll be direct about it. There is a, if we had said 49 units, then I can imagine you would hear the same complaints. If we said 99 units, I could imagine you'd hear the same complaint. So, so it's helpful to hear. We need more testimony.
Yeah, and I guess one thing we were thinking was once you do get to a larger number of units, it's likely that, well, you would have a permit from the town, likely. I mean, it'd be hard to imagine any of these areas accommodating that level of development without a permit. So that would be a way to count, would be the permit. But just being exempt from Act 250 is a very big deal to developers. I didn't realize how big of a deal it is until I heard the testimony last year.
In order to have a designated area, so to qualify, I would think you'd have got a town certified town plan. So there'd be permits at least at town level, but I don't know how regulated or unregulated this would be. Okay, any other, Senator McCormick, you had your hand up?
Thanks. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to give a little bit of institutional memory here, maybe. Avoiding Act 250 has been a priority to at least some developers since 1970. And in fact, avoiding the existence of Act 250 was a priority. Certainly, our former colleague, John McClary, has made a career of arguing against Act 250. An organization called Citizens for Property Rights that no longer exists as far as I know, but they certainly mounted some pretty fierce attacks at one time. When the chair just said we need more testimony, Mr. Chairman, what I would want to look at is what record is there of Act 250 itself impeding affordable housing. In other words, affordable housing projects that were subject to Act 250 and the process, the Act 250 process impeded the development. Because what has been described is not Act 250 impeding development. What has been described is developers trying to avoid Act 250 impeding development. And I would stipulate, I agree with that. I think efforts to avoid Act 250 do indeed impede development. I mean, impede the development of affordable housing, the whole 9-acre issue. But I don't, what I'm curious is what about someone who actually, not 9 acres, I'm sorry. I'm speaking without notes. The 9 lots, the 9 units. What happens when someone decides to go for 10 or more units and is subject to Act 250? Does Act 250 stop that project from happening? Because I'm in all of the years of this debate, and I've been on the Natural Resources and Energy Committee for many years. I used to chair this committee, and I don't recall ever getting testimony that describes that happening. Maybe my memory is faulty. But I think that it is true that many developers don't like the accountability that Act 250 requires of them regarding environmental criteria. And they do indeed, some of them do indeed take steps to avoid that accountability. And I think it's regrettable that we would now want to make it yet easier to avoid accountability. I suspect I'm in a minority on this. I've been at this long enough to smell the wind, but I do. I actually think I've got this right, and I want to at least say it.
And,
That's all.
Harrison, and thank you, Senator McCormick. Senator Harrison, anything else you want to chip in before we go on to our next bill introduction?
Just philosophically, I believe in strong, good regulations. And so I am not advocating for hodgepodge development or for folks to get around the law. What I'm advocating for are this experiment, this 3-year experiment that I thought we had arrived at last year, being an appropriate experiment where the development was only going to be in the certain areas. It would encourage folks to increase those areas, and we would get housing built while we figure out the long-term plan. So that's how I see it. And thank you very, very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and we came up with this construct last year in order to bring legal clarity to the right to claim the exemption. If the method to bring legal clarity to right to claim the exemption is could be better, then we should consider. So thank you.
Thank you.
So I will just say I had to reflect on that question, is it, I hadn't thought about it before, but yes, I do think the exemption is narrowed to between 10 and 24 units, not 4. If that is an existing provision.
Yeah.
The 9 units are already exempt, so I do think the JO requirement only applies to the projects that designated areas with between 10 and 24 units.
Okay, well, thank you. That's reassuring. I mean, I know that was our intent. Thanks for double checking. All right, so thank you, Senator Harrison. We're gonna move on. Thank you, Senator Renner, for your patience. And to hear Bill S-232, an act relating to revoking Vermont's use of California's Clean Air Act waiver. So, Senator Renner, would you like to introduce the bill to the committee, and before we have council walk through it?
My pleasure, thank you. For the record, Irene Renner, Senator for Chittenden. Appreciate your invitation to introduce S-232, whose purpose I frankly cannot parse from the description. So I'll take a few minutes, if I may, to explain its origin, based on the marketplace of the moment and constituent feedback. As a charter member of the Essex Town Energy Committee, I spent 15 years studying climate issues and encouraging the conservation of energy, the adoption of efficient appliances, and the conversion to renewable sources. I was thrilled to ride in a friend's Tesla what seems like many years ago now. And like so many people, I thought electric vehicles were where we were all headed as soon as possible. So I didn't blink at all when Vermont adopted California's plan to cut back on the manufacture of gasoline-powered vehicles over time. Fast forward to today, and the excitement about EVs has waned. Constituents say they feel forced to buy an electric car, and they just aren't ready. They see staggering price tags that offset the incentives. They hear about production challenges, inadequate local charging stations, and limited battery ranges. They question the ability of the state's grid to handle the coming demand for electricity. And they develop range anxiety just thinking about possible
electric vehicle purchase. In November, they read about the decision of Democratic Governor Ned Lamont to withdraw Connecticut's proposed regulations, which mirror California's clean vehicle standards. Once it was clear he lacked enough support on key legislative committees to halt the sales of new gas-powered vehicles by 2035. Same situation that Vermont's in. With that. Mirroring of California standards. In December of last year, the Atlantic magazine profiled Michael Tryman, a vice president of companies selling charging stations. His job is to convince people that EVs are the future and that it's time to start planning for them. But on his personal time, Michael is driving a hybrid, not an EV. The author of that article concluded that Humboldt hybrid is having a moment. Confession, we have 4 Prius hybrids within the 4 people around right now. Indeed, just 3 weeks before the publication of that piece in the Atlantic, a Prius hybrid won Motor Trend's 2024 Car of the Year. Why? Because hybrids provide many of the same advantages without the hassles of electric vehicles. A week before that, in early November, Charles Murray in the Chicago Tribune pondered why the middle class is not buying EVs. And I quote him, "Not all car buyers are wealthy environmentalists. The time has come for the electric vehicle to trickle down from wealthy enthusiasts, but it's not happening. Working class customers just aren't cooperating. Working class consumers just aren't cooperating. It seems they have their own ideas about what to do with their disposable income." End of that quote. My introduction to this bill to pull back on the California standards in Vermont is born of the following recognition. As important as it is for humans to stop burning fuels of all types, the path to do so in car engines is going to take a little longer than anticipated. 2027 is coming very fast, and so is 2035. My request would be that this committee reassess Vermont's timeline for phasing in EVs and phasing out gas-powered engines on the supply side. Let's be sure the electric grid can handle it. The more charging stations are available, the prices of EVs come down, that the next generation of batteries takes hold, which an electrical engineer in my district who pays attention to this marketplace tells me is merely a year or 2 away. Thank you for considering my constituents' concerns and the current state of the marketplace. For your time.
Thank you. Any questions for Senator Brennan? I'm down, I'm reading your eyebrows.
When's the California date for this to happen again?
2027, we start limiting how many gas-powered vehicles we sell. By 2035, we can't sell new gas-powered vehicles anymore, and it's 3 miles away.
The 2027 date, I'm trying to remember from when the rule came through Elkhart, but I don't. Is it limit the number of, like by percentage, or how does it start limiting before they're prohibited?
Does the Legislative Council know that? I don't know that.
Yes, do you want to jump in?
Sure.
Ellen Tchaikovsky, Office of Legislative Counsel. So I believe the way that it's phrased is that car manufacturers are required to provide a certain percentage of their fleet as electric vehicles starting in 2027, eventually ramping up to 100%. So it's requiring a certain amount of electric vehicles to be on the market.
Okay, so it's a percentage of their offerings.
Yes,
There's no obligation for anyone to buy those.
correct.
Okay, not, and then, okay, but here we go.
We listened, Secretary Moore spoke to us last week about meeting deadlines. And the question we asked was, is it true, or if it is true, that automobiles that you can buy in the dealerships have more and more vehicles that get better and better gas mileage today? But that citizens are not buying them, they are in fact buying more and more vehicles that get worse gas mileage than the year before. Rather than put the kibosh on electric vehicles today, why don't we, help get the gas vehicles that are available sold instead of the gas guzzlers being sold today? That was a longer than I intended to ask the question.
I think we've all seen this in our lifetimes, haven't we? People drove small cars when they had gas lines, when they had to wait in line and only go on certain days according to their license plates. I've seen in recent years, my friends buy bigger and bigger vehicles, even though they voted for bills like S5. They freely admitted they wanted the bigger car, they didn't really need it, but they love that safety feel of the bigger car, and yes, it's not as, you know, energy conservation minded, but you know, it's human nature, right? You buy maybe the bigger, look at Honda, the Civic used to be a small car, now it's a sedan that doesn't get as good gas mileage as the one that they put out here 20 years ago, right?
Anymore in the United States.
I mean, a lot of this is consumer driven, and we are those consumers as well. We, along with all of our friends and relatives and our constituents, are being offered cars with a choice. Do you want that hybrid? Do you want that bigger car with this non-hybrid? And people have some freedoms in this country, like it or not. And the marketplace, as long as they can afford it, to buy these things. I don't know how much we can or should
We
force
could make it
people to
more,
buy an
we could make it much more difficult to afford those things.
Perhaps, right, exactly, and again, maybe we can incentivize hybrids or something, you know, to give people that middle ground if they don't feel like they wanna wait till they get to the next charging station, given that
Thank you.
plug-in option.
Mr. Chair, my preference would be to go after gas guzzling new vehicles and have fewer of those sold than to preemptively say yes what California is trying to do and watch California thing play out with your solution, Senator, as a ready to be used should it go awry. Should it play out go awry. Thank you, because this is, you're gonna have to answer this question sooner or later.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right,
The administration has in part of its analysis of what our emissions are likely to be and whether we're apt to meet the legal requirements of the Global Warming Solutions Act. Included and cited actually, our participation in the California rule for California Air Resources Board rule as part of how we're going to make it. So if this were if you were to revoke that, then do you have any concerns that it lessens, well, it will virtually ensure that we don't make our greenhouse gas emissions targets in the realm of transportation?
Well, I'm all for saving the planet and doing all that we can.
Yeah.
And to that effect, I introduced a bill last year to push out the GWSA deadlines, which I believe is still on the wall. Because I think we have to be realistic. We can incentivize consumers to do things, and I'm all for that. But last I knew, it's still a consumer marketplace, and so if people don't buy things where, you know, we have a run on gas powered cars as 2035 approaches. And those values become artificially high because people still have range anxiety or whatever it is that's stopping people from buying EVs. I think we have to look at all of that, at least.
Um,
For the record, I have any games.
Thank you.
Just,
I have a plug, but
Yeah.
I haven't done all the way.
Senator, Hudson.
As a working class person who leases an EV, I would encourage anybody listening to explore that option. To help make it affordable for people to pursue electric vehicles. I'm happy to talk to anybody about my experience with electric vehicles, and I love it, it's great. Also, I would just put forward that climate change is a timed test. And there are legitimate consequences to pushing out our reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. And so if we were to revoke the Clean Cars and Trucks 2, or advanced clean cars and trucks, would you, so your solution is to pursue hybrids. Have you done any thinking around the difference in greenhouse gas emissions reductions achieved by that change?
I have not specifically done that. My experience from talking to people is that they're thrilled with their hybrids when they make that first leap. And so again, for some people, that's the first step into maybe becoming an EV owner someday, but maybe they won't, but maybe this is just a better way to cut their gas consumption and their emissions in half. Maybe that's just the best we're gonna do for some people. And again, we live in this world where there's a reality out there in the consumer marketplace that we're fighting all the time, right? Because you see the advertisements that are for the big gas and gasoline cars. And yet, you know, those of us who have seen the light in one way or the other understand that we haven't given up maybe anything in making a switch, but we're just in a place where we can't dictate to people what they can drive.
Are you offering any other solutions for us to meet our greenhouse gas targets, reduction, requirements, in the sector of transportation?
I think it's important that we emphasize conservation, you know, carpooling and things that have worked for a really long time that I don't hear as much emphasis about now. And I'd like to think that rather than picking winners and losers in the marketplace, saying these are the way to go, and we need to have people do that. Encourage people to get back in that small car, encourage people to, you know, try out a hybrid, you know, small steps. From a consumer psychology standpoint, I think have worked in the past. And yeah, there's all kinds of things we can do that don't necessarily pick a winner or loser of one vendor or another.
I would just follow, I would love to chat with you
Yeah.
more online about the effectiveness of those kinds of programs.
It'd be great.
Okay,
You got a hot button issue, so that's for created.
Understood. Well, like I said, I heard a lot of people's stories, so we need to address it. Thanks.
Right, it's, you know, for clarity's sake, for if someone's watching, you won't be able to buy post, I don't know if it's in 2035 or post 2035. Council, I suppose, can tell us how the threshold works, but you'll be able to buy a new internal combustion engine vehicle. You can still have the one you already own, or you can still purchase a used one.
Or we could pass your bill. Before that time.
Right, the other benefit of the California Air Resources Board rule is that it improves gas mileage of all the vehicles, you know, the fleet average economy goes up by mandate during the next 11 years before you ever get to the prohibition. So there's benefits regardless of whether we're talking about electric or hybrid electric.
I'm all for the increase. I'm on board with that. That would be adopted, standalone.
Okay, I don't know if there is a mandate for that outside of the California Air Resources Board, like under the normal transportation or normal EPA rules. Okay. Right, so we should, thank you very
Thanks
much.
so much.
And let's do a walkthrough with council, just so we tune up our knowledge of the Clean Air Act provisions that we often refer to as the California rule, that we're one of, whatever, 14 states, 17, thank you.
Ellen Tchaikovsky again. So The first three sections of this bill all contain identical language being added to multiple sections in statutes.
Yeah.
So first on page 1, 10 VSA sections 567 is being amended, and this statute gives the Secretary of A&R authority to provide the rules for emission controls. And so it's adding language here that says, however, the secretary shall not adopt the California rules for new motor vehicles authorized in the Clean Air Act 42 USC 7507. 7507 is the provision that establishes California's waiver. So you may recall that under the Clean Air Act, the federal government establishes and preempts states from adopting their own individual emission control rules. However, California has been granted the authority to do so, and then any state may then opt to join California's rules.
Right.
And so that is what we have been operating under along with 16 other states.
What's the date that the preemption began?
I believe it is 1970, but I don't know, I'm not 100% sure.
Sorry.
I think the California Air Resources Board rule dates to the fifties. Because in the LA Basin or whatever, the pollution was significant, they decided to tackle it well ahead of the federal government.
Yeah, and so the provision in the Clean Air Act specifies that anyone who had an existing plan, which at the time really was only California, they could then adopt their own standards. And then, but then also additional states may adopt whatever California has adopted. So sorry, I'm trying to search for the exact dates, but I don't have it.
So somewhere right in there, 70, 71, 72, I forget, Clean Air Act, okay, and then. And it's an all or nothing, right? So you either follow the EPA standard or the California. So-called California standard.
Yes. So then on page 2, the same language is being added in 10 VSA section 558, which again is about emission controls. And so the Secretary, again, of Natural Resources has the ability to establish emission control requirements by rule in their judgment as necessary to prevent, abate, or control air pollution. And then the language is added, however, the Secretary shall not adopt the California rules for new motor vehicles authorized in the Clean Air Act 42 USC 7507.
Is this area, because we're a delegated state under EPA, that we have to follow a federal standard if we're not following the California standard?
I don't know. I just, when researching, Andy and I went looking for where in statute we may have formally adopted the California waiver, and we didn't. It has by operation been done through the Secretary's motor vehicle rules. And so that's why, in order to sort of be very clear that we're no longer going to participate in the waiver, we've added it to multiple areas of the statute where the Secretary could argue that they have the authority to do so.
I see, okay. And I think actually, if I'm remembering right, from when the rule came to power a year ago, that we've been part of it. The California rules for 27 years. So it's a well-established strategy in the state.
Governor Douglas proposed. Supported the California rules back when he was elected, and Elkhart backed him up. Listed them close votes 5-3, 5-3, Elkhart several times. But having to do with vehicle standards.
That there were people who at that time wanted to leave the California.
Yeah, they wanted to. Talk the whole thing.
Thank you, and then one more cross-reference here, I guess.
Yes, so it's being added to the language regarding the climate action plan. Because under the climate action plan, as you will see on page 3, If the council fails to adopt the plan or update the plan, the secretary has the authority to adopt rules to achieve the greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And then the language is added. However, in neither instance shall the secretary adopt the California rules. And finally, section 4 repeals the rule that was adopted in order to implement these rules. Yes, and you will recall it was adopted on, I believe, December 1st-ish, 2022.
Time flies when we're having fun in Alpine.
Yes.
Didn't realize it was that long ago already. Okay. Any committee questions for council? So that completes our work for the day. Thank you, everyone. We are adjourned.